Hello, everyone. I'm Staci-lee from Reality Checks with Staci-lee and All About Animals Radio. And I am here today talking with Jack Geshard. He has been the voice of the threatened and possibly endangered Tule elk out in California. And he also works with Animal League in defense of animals. And we are going to be talking about an issue that has been going on for many, many years, but possibly might have some good updates, some good news, and of course, an action alert for those that want to help the elk. So, Jack, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start with an overview of what is going on with the Tule elk out in California for people who are not familiar with the issue and don't know what's going on.
Great. Happy to do that. There are about 500 Tule elk, a rare subspecies of California native elk, smaller than moose back east, let's say, but bigger than deer out here in California. And they are in Point Reyes National Seashore, specifically the herd that I'm working with and In Defense of Animals is, and my Tree Spirit project. They were brought into the park. Point Reyes National Seashore is a 71,000 acre national park unit, a national seashore, 20 miles north of San Francisco. And just trying to think where to go here to keep it short and do it in bites. But the 500 elk in the park in 3 different herds, and one of the largest herds is in a fenced compound, which is what we'll be talking about today, comprise about 10% of the entire Tule elk population of the world, about 5,000, 5,500 Tule elk. So they are rare. There's only 5,000-ish in the world. They don't have the endangered, to be technical, ranking that's given out by the Fish and Wildlife Service. And that's a lot of that's actually political because people want to hunt the animal and it's endangered or threatened. You can't hunt usually. So I speak with an elk biologist, one of many, many activists and people engaged in this issue, trying to have these animals at Point Reyes Seashore be, well, of course, they're not hunted or shot there because it's a national park unit established in 1962, and the elk were brought in and reestablished. They were down to only about, gosh, it was like 10 or 20 at most elk in the entire state. And they brought a group of 10 individuals, elk, up to Point Reyes Seashore, which was great, done by the National Park Service in 1978. When I was just graduating high school, actually, and the population boomed. They did well. They had erected a fence to keep them away from cattle operations that were still in the park that were supposed to be removed and out of the park by 1987, which is 9 years after these elk were brought in. So the ranchers don't particularly want elk on what they consider their property, but then it gets complicated because the ranchers actually don't own the land. It's the only national park unit in the country which has actually active dairy operations. Dairy and beef ranches, but specifically the dairy operations operating inside the park happens nowhere else in the entire National Park Service, CADRA assortment of park units, which is, seashores and national parks like Yosemite and Yellowstone, the bigger ones. But the issue here, is, hey, don't fence in half of the population of the 500 wild elk at Point Reyes Seashore, which they currently are fenced in at the northernmost little peninsula of Point Reyes National Seashore on what's called Tamales Point. There is a Tule elk reserve. And I always do my little finger quotes when I say reserve, because the reserve is killing elk. So 2 issues. One is we want them protected in the park and to be free, but then they come into conflict with the privately owned cattle ranches, which are renting land in the park. They are also the major polluters in the park, the cattle ranches, because there are about 4,500 to 5,000 cows, depends on the season, depends on the day. But they actually produce, people don't know, but a great deal of manure and urine that goes on the land. Then in the seasonal rains here in California, which are in our winter, they wash into the waterways and they contaminate the streams, the bays, the lagoons, and ultimately the Pacific Ocean, where all of this is. Point Reyes Seashore is along the Pacific Ocean, as I said, just north of San Francisco. So that's a lot of information to digest. And I'm sorry for spewing it out so quickly, but I assume people are pretty quick. And what it's boiled down to now is, and the good news, let me start with that. The actual good news, it is really true. For people who love animals, national parks, wild lands. The environmentalists and animal rights folks, and I'm a member of both of those groups,
Me
are
too.
fighting so many losing battles, right? It gets so depressing. This is actually a group of activists activated a much larger community of citizens and informed the media. So those three elements, activists, lots of citizens, and the media. And then there's also 2 lawsuits in addition. And I've actually got the Park Service, a federal agency in the Department of Interior, the federal government, to now, as of June 9th, so this is relatively new news, to say they are proposing to remove the fence finally at Point Reyes Seashore, which would free this largest herd of elk into the whole park. And then would come the next set of issues, which is now the ranchers are going to be upset that there's more conflict with the elk, not fighting with cows. They're both herbivores and peaceful, but quote unquote, the elk, and they're only, 250 of this herd we're trying to release to reconnoiter with the entire population of 500 elk.
Mhm.
And there are about 9 commercial private cows just there to make money in a national park, competing with every 1 elk. So the other issue we're working on concurrently, because they are interpenetrating issues, is to remove private cattle operations from a public park.
Right.
And they're also heavily subsidized, which they don't admit to, because they want to keep their sweetheart deal that they've had for many years. They have a lot of political muscle, and maybe Staci-lee will get into the whole cattle industry and their devastating effect nationwide,
Yes.
which is so
Yes.
upsetting. We were talking before we began here of our generation. It's like, oh, the nice happy cows and the Ben and Jerry's fields, and I have ice cream, and we just have some milk, and it's all natural, and it's been going on for thousands of years. But I'm assuming your listeners know a lot better. But that's the dominant narrative that vegans and vegetarians and animal lovers are constantly encountering. So we just need everybody, in my opinion, as an activist, obviously, to just keep revealing these truths. And then people will make a shift and just, go to more plant-based foods. If not, obviously entirely plant-based foods would be the ideal. But that issue is all in microcosm at Point Reyes National Seashore, where they are fencing in elk who have died by the hundreds in recent years, because now we're in drought because of the climate crisis. And then back to full circle, why the climate crisis? Fossil fuels, yes, but also, I don't say animal agriculture, the popular phrase, because that hides the truth. I call
Right.
it cattle ranching.
Cattle ranching. Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to circle back to a couple of things just so people could really understand.
Please.
The elk were reintroduced in
78.
1978, and the ranchers were given many years until 1987.
87.
That's
From
right.
1962 to 1987, 25 years.
25
And they were paid millions of dollars, by the way. They took the money,
Right.
and they were supposed to then transition out. They were given a fair amount of time, for all businesses, we want to be reasonable with you and pay you. And then you're going to transition out so your kids won't inherit the ranch and continue this business, because we want to make a national park. And they exercised their political muscle. It's not illegal, but they got politicians to say, okay, we'll give you a 5-year extension after 1987, and then another 5 years, and
Right.
another 10 years. And right now they've just been granted, before this big shift in policy, which we activists are excited about, they granted them a 20-year provisional lease to stay another 20 years during a climate crisis, which
Absurd.
it's absurd would be a nice way of saying it. Yes.
Absurd. But I just wanted people to understand that this is not a new issue, that this has been going on for decades. I mean, decades. First of all, when the elk were reintroduced, it wasn't a secret. It took months or years, as anyone knows, for the planning stage, and then the committees and the funding. And okay, so this doesn't happen in a bubble. So everybody, including the ranchers, knew that this was coming months and years in advance. So they already had plenty of time to plan. They could have gotten out in 1979. They could have gotten out 1980. It was a gift taxpayers funded, by the way, to wait until 1987. That was 36 years ago. That's almost 4 decades. That's almost half a century. This has been going on. So I just wanted people to really be clear on how long this nonsense has been going on. And the Park Service used to really be the good agency of the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management. That BLM has always been a crap show. I'm on record saying that. Fish and Wildlife used to be good in the 80s and 90s, but not really since then. And the Park Service was always pretty much park rangers who, well, they started out pretty bad as hunters, and then in the 1940s and 50s, they kind of got their what together. And then they started actually preserving the jewel of the crown, right? The national parks and national seashores, which there was never supposed to be any kind of hunting or fishing. Of course, that has now changed. You're actually allowed to hunt in national parks, which is absurd. So now the Park Service has kind of gone backwards, obviously for political reasons, and there's always some little cashola involved in that. But I just wanted people to realize that this has been going on for a long time. And of course, you've been a voice for the Tule elk trying to get this out for a really long time. Now,
I don't want to claim credit where it isn't. So I appreciate that. And I've been an environmentalist and a forest advocate with my Tree Spirit project for well over a decade, 15 years about. But I'm new to this issue, relatively so. I've been on it 3 years very actively, and with the support the last couple of years from In Defense of Animals, who's been very active in this issue, but also many other organizations, many other activists, and a lot of citizens. But we've seen it turn around because I guess I came in with a kind of another wave of energy of more people willing to work on it. And we
definitely in the last 2-3 years, because I didn't even know about it, and I'm pretty up on things, and I had no idea.
So my message to anybody listening, because I'm as Tree Spirit Project, I'm also a consultant for these kinds of issues. If you're pissed off about something, it takes a lot of work, but you want to find other people in your community who want to work on, as I say, you want to think globally and act locally, of course. So I'm working at, this is in my backyard, the elk behind me. I'm going to clear myself out of the picture. This is Point Reyes Seashore. Those elk are standing a 45-minute drive, 50-minute drive from where I'm sitting. So I care very much. It's local, but I get to work on the national cattle issue, even really an international climate issue.
Yeah, the cattle issue, I know from my work with wild horses, it's the same. I have nothing against cows. It's not the cows, it's the ranchers. I don't want to blame the animal, the cow. They just go where they're told, really, basically. But cows do a huge amount of damage to not just when we say ecosystem, they pee and poop in the water. And you cannot filter that out. Sorry, folks. Once something's in the water, it's in the water forever. If you're talking about something solid, like a piece of furniture, if you put that in the water, it doesn't break down right away. But anything that is soft or liquid that goes in the water, darling, you're drinking it. As
I heard a longtime animal rights activist say recently in a video, and taught me, we take nutrients, plant food, and push them through domesticated, basically confined, tortured cows, get lots of cholesterol added to the nutrients, and then eat that stuff. And I only recently, I will admit, I didn't know that cholesterol was only in animal products. You can't get cholesterol.
Only animal products, yeah.
Right.
And dairy is actually worse when it comes to fat. Dairy is like condensed saturated fat and cholesterol. It's one of the worst things you could possibly consume. Thank God I was never a cheeseaholic person. I guess I was just always born to be vegan. So it's not that, for anyone listening, it's not that we have anything against the cows per se, but they do not belong in a national park or seashore, and they certainly should not be displacing our native wildlife, which is basically going extinct. Because of this, they're losing their habitat as well as their life, their water and everything else because of this, and it's just absurd. So when people eat steak, and obviously a lot of people do, if you weren't driving that industry, we wouldn't have a lot of these problems.
So as an activist, this issue is particularly easy because we say it's a national park unit. So it's not about private property rights or anything like that. It's just, we shouldn't be fencing in and culling. They actually have permission to shoot, to cull, to kill, shoot to death. The Park Service does some of the elk if they get above these arbitrary numbers that they set because they're in a fenced compound or fenced areas. Also, I do want to say, I just realized we should probably plug. So to be respectful of people's time, I'm thrilled if people will stay and listen to the whole show we're doing here. But also right now, we're recording this on a Friday afternoon, September 22nd in the afternoon. And until through today, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then through Monday, September 25th, there's a chance for people to put in a public comment. It can take you as quick as 2 minutes and tell the Park Service, who has done a official proposal. It's part of a NEPA law, National Environmental Policy Act, which is actually in the news again now because, of course, some administrations, the previous one, no names, are trying to gut NEPA laws and remove environmental protections. But right now, you can go to, I'm going to give you 2 URLs, easy to remember, and you can follow simple instructions. And in 2 minutes, write a public comment, which in effect says, thank you, Park Service, for proposing removing the elk fence and freeing the Tule elk. And oh, by the way, I'd also like cattle operations out. And if you do nothing but that, which is that quick, you will do a tremendous help. We already have over 10,000 people have signed the In Defense of Animals form that links to the National Park Service form. So that's the easiest way. And that URL is idausa.org/elk. I'll say that again. IDA is short for In Defense of Animals, idausa.org//elk. If
And
people
that
want
takes
more,
you right to the form that people
and that
can
takes
fill
you,
out.
it forwards to an alert page
Okay.
and a simple form, which is name, address, and email. And then you make comments. There's a sample letter that I've written there. And in addition, you can get more information if you want. If some people have more time, on my website, treespiritproject.com, not a .org. Well, actually it's both, but treespiritproject.com/elk. There's an informational page, because this is going to be an ongoing issue, but that's in either one of those URLs. IDA is the simpler one to remember. That's great. IDA USA. I feel like Al Gore. 1-800 Al Gore donation, but that's dating myself. idausa.org/elk. People can spend literally 2 minutes and just, okay, boom, name, address, yes, get the elk out, free them, and I want cattle ranches out of this national park. Sounds like a good idea, and you're done. That quick. So thank you for letting me do that plug right in the middle of the show here.
And also, just to let people know, as much as we are concerned and want to save the elk, this is also a broader issue, because if we continue to allow this kind of thing, it's not just the elk that we're going to kill off. It's going to mushroom out of control.
It already has. It already has.
It has. I think there's 11 national parks that allow cow grazing, cattle grazing.
18 national park units in my head that allow grazing. Point Reyes is unique for having an actual business where they milk cows, a dairy operation, thousands of cows. But I'm told the number, I mean, I guess it changes from year to year, but it's about 18, a lot more than a dozen grazing rights, because private industry, the cattle industry, wants to, get into all the public land, whether it's BLM or national parks even. And it's just, oh, and by the way, you said it's going to happen. No, it's already happening, which is when people read about, oh, the wolves are dying out, or mountain lions are going extinct, or coyotes are being shot by a division of the government called Wildlife Services, mountain goats at Grand Tetons, buffalo, bison, right, at Yellowstone. It just goes on and on. All of these animals are being complained about as being destructive by cattle ranchers. It's all back to cattle, and through no fault of their own, as you said.
Exactly. In fact, the mountain goats, ironically, there was a population of mountain goats that were up in northwestern Washington state. I don't know what happened to them, but they didn't survive. So the mountain goats in Wyoming, in Grand Teton National Park, I don't know how many, I don't recall offhand how many there were. I wrote an article about this because I couldn't believe it. The Park Service decided to kill the mountain goats in Wyoming. Instead of sending them to Washington state, the national parks in Washington state actually wanted them. This is where we are. The bison, right? I mean, you can't get more iconic and native of an animal in America other than the wild horse. And they are allowed to be hunted. Trophy hunters are allowed to come into Yellowstone National Park, not lure them off the park, actually come into the park. These are outside trophy hunters. These are not park rangers or anything like that. By the way, the park does not shut down. Tourists do not know that this is going on, right? Elk, one of the conditions of forming Grand Teton was that they allowed the hunting of elk in the park.
Money, it's all about money for licenses to shoot, license to kill.
license to kill. So this issue with the Tule elk isn't just about the Tule elk. It's indicative of a much larger, and in my view, sicker problem of not only allowing non-native animals to live in a national park that taxpayers support, but to maneuver out our native species, even when they are endangered. And then sometimes the answer to that is to hunt the native species to protect the non-native species that we shouldn't be eating in the first place because it gives us cancer and heart disease and diabetes, but that's a whole other issue. I mean,
And speaking of heart disease,
right?
it's easy to make a cogent, rational, science-based argument that the cattle industry is far more destructive than the smoking industry. Because it's not just, smoking kills your lungs, right? Or passive smoking kills the lungs of people near you. And we've moved on that in this country. And then we farmed the cigarettes out overseas, of course. But cattle, while it's arguably an unhealthy product, some would say carcinogenic, certainly unhealthy in the amounts that we eat it. And it's a processed food too.
Yes.
No less processed than the plant-based substitutes of the veggie burgers and vegan stuff. They're all processed, all of it. And then it's also destroying the environment. Oh, and by the way, a little thing called the climate crisis. If you believe in, science, that methane from cows, believe it or not, it's invisible. And that's why the industry is so successful in just lying about it, because you can't see it. Can't see global warming. You don't think.
You can hear it and you can smell it because the belching and the farting of cows, if you're close enough. But that is true. That I believe that is actually a greater contributor than automobiles or
greenhouse gases. Yeah, I mean, it depends on your numbers, but I at the very most conservative estimate of transportation sector, which is all planes, trains, automobiles, putt-putts, and all motor vehicles combined, ships, roadways, and airplanes, which of course everybody knows are polluting. All that combined is like 13 or 14%. This is according to the United Nations, the report of greenhouse gases. And animal farming, which I call cattle factories, are at least 17% of greenhouse gases. And that's the most conservative estimate by the UN. And the World Bank did a wonderful report which estimated, taking into account how there's carbon dioxide of trucking inside that industry and methane and duration of how it degrades in the atmosphere, it was 51% of all greenhouse gases. And that's a hotly contested figure. But to play it safe, if you want, depending on who you're talking to, it's certainly more than the transportation sector. That is an accepted fact.
But then, Jack, you have to tie the two in together as well.
It's not just on the internet.
But then you have to tie the two in together, because people don't go and shoot the cow and then eat it raw. They have to use transportation, which involves planes, trains, automobiles, and sometimes ships to ship it all over the world. So you see, we may not be giving up the airplane and the car, but we can give up the state because that contributes in a host of ways. And they pollute the water that we drink. So even if you're vegan, you're still getting the negative effects of it, unless you don't ever shower or, the lunacy of how we do things. But I did want to get to some of the potential good news. Well, why we're talking today on Friday about what's going on with the public comment, and where you see the likelihood that they're going to when they might make a decision, and what that would mean for the Tule Elk. Because as we all know, even if the government said, on December 1st, okay, we're going to take down the fence, that doesn't mean the fence comes down December 2nd.
God, no. It's a painfully long process for us impatient activists. But actually, as far as federal change goes, the way I frame it is this. I've been working on this 3 years. People have been working on it for many, many years, but it's accelerated in the last 2 years. And there have been 2 lawsuits that are currently going on and pressing the Park Service as well, which is an embarrassment for them that they're being, outed basically for killing the wildlife in a national park.
Well, they should be.
And giving subsidized private cattle ranching the run of the place, and polluting the seashore, Point Reyes National Seashore on the West Coast above San Francisco. So the win is activists, lawsuits, citizens, a lot of media coverage, TV coverage for the elk behind me, the beautiful animals, have got the Park Service to make a proposal as of June 9th to remove the elk fence, which is the first necessary step of rewilding this park, and allowing the Tule elk to be freed from this drought-stricken compound, so they're not dying by the hundreds that they had in the last decade, which is a brutal term, a management tool. Well, the population will rise and fall. because of the drought, because they're blocked by a fence and can't go find water on the larger park outside the boundary of the reserve. So the Park Service is asking for public comments now. So we ask you to, as I'll give the URLs here, go and say, yes, we support your proposal to remove the fence, which they're calling alternative B out of an A, B, and C choice. And that's at idausa.org/elk, idausa.org/elk. And there's a simple form that'll take you 2 minutes to do. More information on my treespiritproject.com website, treespiritproject.com/elk. There's more information. It also leads to the same form. And it's a big win for the environmental movement. It's the first step toward then raising the next step of awareness, which is cattle in this park are a destructive force, as they are a destructive force everywhere. It's an unusual win in a relatively short time when you think that some 6-year term senator might not get a bill passed in the 6 years he or she's been working on it. So in just the 3 short years I've been working this campaign, we're seeing a change in federal policy, and the door is opening to release these elk. And then, of course, it will raise a whole new host of issues about conflict with the cattle ranchers. And as in all these cases, just informing the public, an educated electorate, is the answer to so many problems, because people are, I mean, on this issue, it's so easy. It's just such a no-brainer because it's a national park where everyone knows wild animals should be free, and there shouldn't be any businesses of any kind polluting a national park, let alone cattle operations, which pollute, massively.
Now, I wanted to clarify, alternative B
B for better. B for better.
Okay, so what might be A?
Okay, so fair enough. A is everything's fine, leave things as they are.
Okay,
They're
that's
required
no
by
good, right? That's
well, they're
no
required by law to offer we will do nothing.
Right.
That's one option. It's a rational argument to have that. B
Okay.
is we're going to remove the fence, and then there's a host of other things which it gets very granular. On my website has more about that, and links to the Park Service website, which is always hard to find, but more about that. And then alternative C, the third is don't release the elk and cull the elk in the reserve. And some other horrible stuff. It's what I call it's so terrible. It's such an obviously pro-ranching alternative. It's no alternative at all. And I choose, with my boundless optimism, despite opposition, to see that as a very clear choice. You either are going to leave it terrible, which got the Park Service in hot water politically, because it just looks so awful to do what they're doing. You're going to remove the fence, which doesn't put the cattle operations out of business. They're not going to be happy, but it doesn't put them out of business. Or C, make things even worse for the wildlife and give even more to the ranchers. So that's not tenable either. So of the 3 choices we're presented with, B, the middle choice, B for better, is the way to go.
Okay, well, that's actually good, because oftentimes when they do that, it's like you need a team of lawyers to go through the difference between A and B. But here, this is clearly do nothing, do the right thing, or make it like a worse.
And even still, you're right. It is a bureaucracy, and they're not the worst, but it's not. Let's put it this way: it's not really clearly designed. It's like going to a PG&E or Con Edison website and saying, "Pay your bill." Well, pay your bill is easy. If you want to say discontinue my service, oh, it's there. Try and find it. Right.
It's very difficult.
So that's why we shuttle you through to do this form and make a public comment. And we're grateful for your attention to this, folks, and a public comment, whether it's through In Defense of Animals or my Tree Spirit Project. We'll give you context and explanation, and you'll know that we're on the side of, yeah, we're kooky. We want wild animals to be free in a national park, and we don't want cattle operations polluting the air and bringing the climate crisis even faster down upon us. That's how wacky we are.
I just had two more questions. One, you had mentioned that this wasn't going to, if they remove the fence, or I should say when they remove the fence, that
the end of next
not...
year. The end of next year, by the way, that would be if it moves a full speed ahead. It would be by the end of next year, which is time is marching on pretty quickly these days.
Well, for government, that seems pretty quick.
Exactly.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that the cows will be leaving. Is that my understanding?
It has nothing to do with removing the cattle operations. That would be the next step.
The next step. Okay.
And there are, again, a couple lawsuits pressing on them right now. So there are negotiations going on, and there are secretive negotiations between the ranching organizations, the ranching concerns, the Park Service, and then 3 environmental groups have brought a suit because of the pollution in the park, which we activists have documented. We've actually hired for thousands of dollars professional engineer to test the water downstream of the ranches and prove, surprise, the fecal coliform content is 200 or 300 times the allowable health limit. And this is going on silently in a national park where people have recreational contact with the water, whether it's splashing around at a beach or people splashing in a kayak or wading or something. You can come into contact with fecal indicator bacteria, as it's the fancy term for it, from cattle manure. Obviously, you don't want to be wading in poopy water, my term for it.
I assume there's no sign warning people.
Correct. There is no sign, and it's worse than that. The first year, we did 2 years of testing. The second year was most extensive. The first year after the testing, we notified the county agency and some reasonable person, low-level person at the agency, I don't want to give names here, but put out a sign. That lasted 24 hours, and then the Park Service saw that. I'm giving a name, the National Park Service, federal, said, you have no jurisdiction here, and they took the sign down, warning about fecal bacteria in the water.
Well, it made them look bad, obviously.
It made them look bad, exactly. So, I mean, people say, aren't there federal, state, and county regulations about water pollution? There sure are. I'll give you $100 cash in the barrelhead if you can get on the phone and make them, any of those agencies, take responsibility and do something about it. It just doesn't work that way. Politics, money, and that's why we activists do what we do, and have been successful. Again, I want to end on that happy note on this issue today. We actually showed that the Martha Mead quote, I'm sure you, Margaret Mead, excuse me, Margaret Mead, which is never doubt that a small, committed group of individuals can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing
that ever does, right? Yes, that is true. So I just wanted to end on one other thing. Let's say someone is tuning in and it's after Monday, right? The deadline for the public comment. That doesn't mean that the fight is over or that they can't help, right? So there's still plenty of work to be done. And in fact, they can still contact the Park Service and say, listen, I don't care, public comment is over. I want the fence removed. I want the cattle out. I want the park, to be a park. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say there's the public comment period officially ends, but you can still sign. Well, actually, here's the question. I don't know whether they take those forms down and close them out. You can always write the Park Service. That takes more effort. We're making it really quick and easy, like literally 2 minutes to do this, because we have a form already on the website that you can fill out very quickly and know what to do. You can always write the Park Service, and they receive them. Sometimes you feel like you're what is that expression, spitting into the wind or something. But if you're interested in this issue, it will be ongoing for sure. And we expect the movement to grow because it's a winning movement, about alerting people about the dangers to wildlife from the cattle industry and the pollution of the cattle industry. And as you said earlier in the show, it's really, I really end on that note, which is, of all the issues that are overwhelming and upsetting today, the thing we can do every single day with such minimal effort, and if you practice it, it then takes no effort and it's easy, is just quit meat and dairy and all animal products. But if you just stop, I mean, I get in trouble for this as a vegan activist from other vegan activists. Just stop eating beef, stop eating pig, eating sweet little pigs. And drinking milk is probably the worst, because the mothers are tortured in addition to taking their milk and taking their babies away. It's not like the industry wants you to believe, where, oh, we just take a little milk and moms are fine out there in the, as I say, the Ben and Jerry cow fields. It's just so not that, despite advertising, which would have you believe otherwise. Daily, you can make a difference with so little effort.
They keep the moms pregnant to get the milk, and then the calves are not really, well, depending upon who the farmer is, they might get a couple of days or they might not get any at all. And then and you can actually find these little gizmos on Amazon for like $1.89. I think there's videos on YouTube showing you how to use it. But they put these rings through the nose. Sometimes they just cover the mouth, and they're spiky. And it's so that when the baby goes to nurse the mom, it inflicts such pain that the mom rejects the baby. As brutal as the slaughterhouses are, the dairy industry is even worse, because not only does it involve the slaughterhouse, but it involves all of that torture leading up to it. And of course, bonus point, it destroys human health as well, not just the water we drink. It completely destroys the land so that you can't grow anything else on it. I mean,
It's amazing, isn't it,
who doesn't love
Staci-lee?
pasta, right?
It's
That's my
amazing that
answer.
our generation, we were, going to public schools with, signs on the cafeteria wall saying 3 glasses of milk a day. And it's only as an adult, decades later for me that I learned, oh, that was all the dairy industry, just infiltrating the government, putting those signs up and brainwashing us little kids.
Well, who drinks milk from another species, and why on earth would an adult drink milk? Milk has one job from any species, and the one job is to give immunity to the baby, their baby of their own species, and to fatten them up very quickly. So I always found it really odd as a woman when people would diet and they'd be like, "Oh no, I'm not eating steak, but I'll have my cottage cheese." And I'm like, "Sweetheart, that's even worse for you."
It's fascinating how powerful our cultural conditioning is. I saw there was a vegan
Yeah.
activist who did some shtick where he's got a table outside at some university and he's got cow's milk and then he has human milk, human breast milk. And people are disgusted with that.
Yes.
And if you just think about that, I mean,
How
I
bizarre,
understand
because
it.
that's our own species, right? It's
Right,
like,
right. Oh, it's disgusting. Why would I drink mom's milk? I'm an adult now, and yet I'm going to drink the mom's milk of a
exactly,
cow. Like
exactly,
it just it
right,
is what a brilliant idea to just reveal people's own conditioning if they're, I mean, even if they're even able to see it when confronted with that bizarreness, because yeah, that's weird, but why is it weird? Let me think about that for a moment.
right.
The
Well,
conditioning is what's weird.
I always say baby food. I'm like, why are you consuming baby food? And people are like, it's not baby food. I'm like, it is baby food.
Yeah.
It's the only baby food, you know. But that's just, people are funny. But I will include these links with the video so people can click on them. And, like Jack said, it only takes a couple of minutes,
Yeah.
only takes a
And
couple of
if you're interested,
minutes.
and if thank you, if you're interested in these issues, you can also, get emails from both In Defense of Animals, anywhere on the website, sign up for email as with my treespiritproject.com website. And we'll keep you informed if you would like about this issue, which is a winning issue. Really, one of the few these days when I need it because I get so, it gets upsetting, of course, to be fighting these losing battles and watching them go down in flames all the times. In the case of the planet, perhaps literally in flames. I'm in California right now, where right now the air quality outside is 140 ppm on the Purple Air app, which means I shouldn't go out and exercise because of wildfires burning in Northern California and Southern Oregon. So that's the world we live in today.
Gosh, Jack, if only someone had warned us years ago. Gosh, if only someone had told us in the, let me think, 70s or 80s that perhaps cars running on oil might not be the only way to move from point A to point B, or if only somebody had done a study on animal agriculture, warning us of these possible issues. Gosh, imagine how different things would be if we didn't have all these if we didn't have all these cows farting and belching and causing all those wildfires. That the Forest Service has a budget of over $9 billion and a nonprofit. I won't even get into how that's legal. And they can't get control of the wildfires, and they don't support native herbivores
Well,
as a way to
I'll do
control
a
it.
30-second deviation and then we'll go. So don't let me get me started, but just 30 seconds, which is out here in California now, the big issue is wildfires, right?
Right, yeah.
Understandably so. And
Oh,
people are
understandably.
justifiably afraid of wildfires, which they're not actually historically increasing, but there's an upswing recently and people think, but now the U.S. Forest Service and a lot of the state parks and a lot of state agencies are advocating thinning forests, which is logging, in order to make the forests safer from wildfire, which is, in other words, cutting down the forests in order to save them, which accelerates the climate crisis, which actually increases wind through the forest, so they'll burn faster. So that's the next fight, which is really depressing because I just like, you're up against these agencies that are doing it mostly to sell the timber, the wood, the trees, dead trees, which we need desperately more of, cutting down trees because, hey, they're going to burn, and they get money for the U.S. Forest Service by selling it to the timber industry. So that's a whole other issue. I'm involved with my Tree Spirit project. So I actually go to, after I'm done with you right now at 4 o'clock on a Friday, I'm going to get in my car and drive out to visit these elk, slow down from my New Yorker's pace out here in California, be with these beautiful animals, thank them for their presence.
Yes.
And the gift of their calm and their quiet that they give me, which I clearly need and benefit
Really
from.
need, yeah.
And so I thank you for letting me go off on that wild, crazy ride of a tangent there, Staci-lee. Thank you.
No, actually, it all goes together. And of course, being a Scorpio, I have a suspicious mind. So I'm thinking, if they thin the forest, it's not just for the loggers, right? Bear with me here for a second, and then I'm gonna let you go. If they thin the forest, right? And then of course you have more wildfires, which are very destructive, and then of course you have more grazing and all of that. It's kind of like, well, if the land is already ruined, shucks, there's no reason to protect it,
We
right?
can hire companies to plant trees.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's
So
called
I'm always thinking there might be something even more nefarious behind all of that, and unfortunately, that has been proven to be true. So it all goes together.
Congratulations, Staci-lee. You're more cynical than me. You win. Good for you.
I'm a New Yorker. I can't help it.
Well, so am I, sister. I get it.
That is true. That is true. So this video will be up and running shortly with the links, and anyone listening, I hope that you take this to heart and just take a couple of minutes and try to help the elk. And it's not just the elk that you will be helping, but you will be making a statement that this nonsense, this BS policy cannot continue. It cannot continue at Point Reyes for the elk. It cannot continue in California. It cannot continue. End of story.
It's a
there's
BS
plenty of
industry.
land for the cows, not the national parks.
It's a BS industry, literally a
It is a
BS
BS
industry.
industry. It is. It really is. It really is. Well, thank you, Jack.
Thank you so much, Staci-lee. Always
Good
a pleasure.
talking to you. So I hope this does some good, and go enjoy the elk. Give them a wave from me. I'm rooting for them.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks to everybody who's listening and cares about this issue. We need more people who care, obviously. So go out into nature, I always say, and feel love for it, feel peace, and then you'll have the energy and the motivation to do something to protect it. We need that.
That is true. That is true. We are part of nature. We forget that sometimes. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, good luck, and send in the comments before Monday. Bye.
Thank you.